And there we are. All right. Welcome, everybody, into the inaugural edition of Talk of the Town on the Curated Media channel here on YouTube. The whole idea of this segment is to sort of distill some of the top stories in entertainment news in a most digestible fashion. So if you're a casual watcher or listener to the entertainment news, we pick the top stories and basically distill it down. I'm joined, as always, by my two cohorts and co-hosts, Pat
Hello.
and JB here in studio with me. So we had one thing that we really wanted to talk about. It's been a very abnormal year in cinema, and the industry is sort of all over the place. They're really just been reacting in real time to everything that's going on. So as we find ourselves in this final quarter of the year, I think we have a little bit more clarity of what sort of the landscape looks like, especially in the exhibition and distribution space. So we thought we would take a little bit of time to talk about that tonight because that sort of seems to be the big story in movies this year, sort of how they're dealing with coronavirus and sort of the fallout from that. So let's talk first about exhibitors, which seem to be absolutely the hardest hit. They might even be the hardest hit industry of anything coming out of the coronavirus. I mean, maybe airlines, you could argue, are tops, but right below them are exhibitors. So we linked in the video description to a New York Times article. It came out back in September, but it still is applicable to now. Basically, it was saying that theaters are slowly reopening and they're opening at limited capacity, but they're still not seeing moviegoers flocking back to the theaters as quickly as they would have hoped. So let's go to you first, Pat. Let's talk a little bit about what your feelings are about the state of exhibition as is currently constituted.
Yeah, I mean it's really dire straits, especially for the large distributors or the exhibitors that were already highly leveraged before the onset of the coronavirus crisis. Uh, they have a ton of debt. They have not a ton of income or no income at all. I believe after that article was published, Regal Cinemas, which owns cinemas, or Cineworld, which owns cinemas both in the United States and the United Kingdom, decided to just shutter their theaters entirely as of October 9th because there's no new product, and they didn't think that it would be less profitable for them to keep them open than it is to literally close them down. So pretty bad situation. JB and RC, what do you think?
Yeah, JB.
Well, I think my understanding is that for Cineworld, the decision by the folks at the World of Bond, when the Bond decided that they weren't going to shoot for the November re-release of the No Time to Die after like originally supposed to be April, and then I think it was pushed back, and they said that was it. Particularly in the UK, they said, well, if Bond's not going to open, then we can't afford to open our theaters. So I think that was a big blow, and I think the fact that they're just so everybody's so uncertain about what's going on, and it's one of those chicken and the egg type things, because if you don't have something in the theater that's going to motivate people to overcome their trepidation, then they're not going to come to see something that they would just wait to see on a streaming service. But then there's the producers and the studios are like, with the tenant experiment, they're afraid that, well, what if we get it wrong and you mistime the last Daniel Craig Bond, or you don't have people showing up for Top Gun 2. I mean, we can't take that chance. There's just way too much money here. So it's sort of like this whole kind of standoff. Like, if the movie theaters are packed with great films, will people come? I think they will. But somebody's got to take that chance and go, you know what? We're putting a line in the sand here, and we're going to put these tentpole films in, and we think people will come back. And it's safe to come back to the theaters.
Yeah, it is interesting. And Pat, one thing I wonder if you might be able to comment on is sort of delineation between these major movie chains and sort of the more independent movie houses, because I know you're very plugged in Boston to the sort of the indie and sort of small theater film scene there, and maybe how they're positioning themselves versus some of these big entities that have a whole lot of overhead that they have to consider.
Yeah, and I actually think that there's a chance that the small regional chains and certainly hometown or neighborhood theaters come out of this. I mean, still bad. It's still a very dire situation, but they aren't as highly leveraged as the big players. They haven't spent years, a majority of them haven't spent years upgrading their, seats and their food services and their projection systems and such. And what they have that these other companies don't is tremendous goodwill within their communities. With partnerships with other businesses in the community, they have a devoted, loyal fan base of customers, people who are willing to come back, are willing to do drive-through concessions, are willing to make donations, are willing to buy virtual programming tickets, and even rent out whole theaters. You have people like myself who have done that for some of my local, cinemas that I really want to survive, and I really want them to be there when we can safely go to a theater again. So I think that's the key differentiator: is these are small businesses that are beloved within their communities, whereas AMC's and Regals, they're anchor tenants in large malls, and people could take them or leave them. I think Americans for years have been telling us that they can take or leave the theatrical experience for the most part at these chains, and so they don't have that lever to pull on.
Yeah. And one thing that we talked about, and we've talked on off camera about this a lot. Where there's crisis, there's often opportunity. So let's go back to sort of the big picture, the big providers, the Cinemarks, the Regals, the AMC's. JB, you have a banking background. Pat also has a finance background. What do we see? Is there opportunity here? What do you think? And if there is one, what do you think that opportunity is?
Well, I think AMC has been teetering on bankruptcy for quite a while, and they've said, I think there was a recent thing I saw on I think it was on Fox Business, about them potentially coming back into the market for a secondary offering of shares to try to raise some capital. I'm not sure how that's going to be received, because it's like, what are you doing with the money? If you're doing it to basically cover losses, I'm not sure that's very exciting pitch to investors. I have personally thought, and we've talked about this, I think off air and maybe on air, I personally thought that there would be a play for like a Disney or an Amazon, perhaps, to make a play for AMC. Probably Jeff Bezos personally could buy up the debt, negotiate a deal, and say, what would I do with a distribution system that's actually old fashioned in terms of its, people have to come out of their house to see the movies, but then I've got them in their house or out of their house. If they go see a movie, I get paid. Isn't that great? And oh, by the way, run some Amazon, commercials at the theater while you're waiting for the, your permanent, your feature film to come up.
Right, pick up your package.
Yeah.
And, why not? And I also thought that with Disney. Why wouldn't Disney do that? They have a perfect opportunity, because they got all sorts of counter programming and different stuff that they could offer, and they're used to live entertainment.
Yeah, Pat, why don't you? I know you're a huge Disney, like you're very plugged into everything that goes on at Disney. So what are your thoughts on, is there any play with Disney, or are they full in on Disney Plus?
I think that they've signaled that they, in a recent investor call or announcement, that they're all in on Disney Plus, that they see streaming, that they refer to theatrical distribution and all other forms as legacy distribution systems.
Wow.
Compared to, which is very strong. Like, not saying that they won't ever release films in theaters again, but
Corporate speak, that's pretty strong.
that's pretty strong. That's as strong as guidance gets. So I don't see them, and they've had such a hard time with their theme parks. Like, they're still not able to open in California. It's questionable whether they should have been allowed to open in Florida, although they've been open now for several months. So I think that Disney's been hit too hard across all their sectors except for Disney Plus, by the pandemic to make a real play at this point. But I agree. Like, if you think about the major chain bookstores, you had Borders, maybe Walden Books, and Barnes and Noble, and Amazon killed them all except for Barnes and Noble.
Right.
Which diversified. They've got cafe. I still will occasionally go to the nearest Barnes and Noble to me if I'm in the area, and they've got a cafe. They've got board games and other things. They've got
Kids toys. There are a lot of
kids toys. Yeah, they sell Lego. They must be loads of those Funko Pops.
Yep.
That's just ended up in landfills. But I think that if you were, to your point, JV, if you were, an Amazon and you wanted to put Amazon lockers in, or a 4-star store or other services, you wanted to, if you're Disney and you want to combine it with a Disney store or something like that, or some other brand, some enterprising brand that, want to combine a bookstore and a I don't know, book and record store with a movie theater, I think that would be a compelling combination.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. You guys have spoken about it, and I've thought about it too. I just think there's got to be a place, someplace that makes sense because nobody wants to see that real estate go into any type of default or these places that are already pretty barren in terms of shopping malls, seeing all the turnover that they have in the past 20 years. Really lose an anchor tenant like that would be just devastating for some of these, small shopping centers like ones that we have around our town
Oh
where we
yeah,
live.
that major anchor.
Yeah. So,
Yep.
but it would be very interesting to see, Amazon get involved. Obviously, I think the interesting play with Disney would be how much of their sort of Imagineering and sort of actual reinvention of the actual movie theater would happen if they had the chance to take over. So that's definitely something to monitor as the year closes. See sort of what happens with year-end earnings and all of that. But let's pivot over sort of the distribution side. So like, JB alluded to it earlier about one of the issues in New York Times articles talked about it is like, you can't get people back in the theaters if there's not product that is being pushed out, like appealing product, mass appeal product. And what we've seen sort of over the last 6 months is things get continually pushed back because you really don't have a clear idea of what the timeline of sort of how things are going to, what the peaks and valleys are going to be, what's going to be open when. And now, like just looking at it, I linked to another article in Vulture, and they're literally updating by the day when releases are getting pushed to, and we're already 2 years out. Right. Like there's things that are getting pushed from 2021 to 2022, things that are getting pushed from 2022 to 2023. So like not only are there things in the can that aren't going to be making their ways to theaters immediately, but there's things that are in production that are going to be delayed, and that might have a sort of a back effect. So I just wanted to list a couple of the notable ones that I did see. Batman was originally supposed to come out next June, and now it's pushed to March of 2022. The Beatles documentary that ended up getting pushed back a full year to August of 2021. Dune was a big one. I know Pat and I were very excited about that. Denis Villeneuve's Dune, and that went from December 18th, and we thought that was going to stay strong there, but now it's going to be October 1st, 2021. Fast and the Furious movie even had to move, which is pretty wild. I mean, that's a big moneymaker. But May 22nd, 2020. If you weren't getting Fast and the Furious fans in seats, you knew there was going to be a problem. Like that, I mean, people are coming out to see that. People are diehard fans of that series. That's back in April 2021. French Dispatch, Wes Anderson film that I know Pat and I were both very excited about, has been pushed back to next October, Prime Award season.
Oh, they did date it finally?
I'm sorry, it got pushed from this October. It looks like I misspoke. It was pushed to October 16th. Now it says delayed indefinitely.
Yeah, that was what I thought, and I'm tremendously disappointed by that.
The Last Duel, which was the Matt Damon Armie Hammer movie, the Ridley Scott movie, is now October 15th, 2021. Last Night in Soho, which is Edgar Wright movie, got pushed to April 2021. Many Saints of Newark, the Sopranos movie, pushed back to March of 2021. Finally, Mission Impossible 2021. And No Time to Die, of course, was one of the big dominoes to fall. Now April 2nd, 2021.
Top Gun 2, July 2nd.
Yeah, and Top Gun 2 got pushed back a full year. But I guess I'm going on and on. But I guess what I wanted to say was, given this sort of backlogging effect and these delays, and sort of figuring out, studios have to figure out sort of what platform and what's worth releasing now and getting direct to consumer and what's worth saving for the theaters. JB, maybe you can speak a little bit. What do you think the strategy is there in terms of what ends up going in theaters and what gets held and what ends up just going VOD and direct to consumer?
Well, I guess there's, quite a bit that goes into it. I suppose it depends on the slate of films that these studios have and where they, what they think the biggest money makers are going to be, what kind of contracts or arrangements they have with creative talent that's behind it. Are they equity participants or, in points and stuff, or is it big salaries up front, and how much of the budget are they worried about recapturing, and how much marketing dollars are they going to have to spend if they depend on a theatrical release as opposed to cutting a deal with a Netflix or an Amazon and put it on Prime or what have you. I mean, I think of the Beatles thing, to me, that's a perfect Netflix or HBO Max type play.
Right.
I don't know how much money Peter Jackson and crew have into that and how much they're expecting to get, but candidly, I don't see that one as being one of those films that's going to draw people to the theater. If you have a good sound system at home and a decent TV, I would think the Beatles thing would be just like the George Harrison one Scorsese did was so really good. So I think it's got to be a little bit of, you have to look through the portfolio and sort of sit there and say, what is the marginal difference between a theatrical run for this one versus direct to streaming, and make a really hard business decision, and then also have to sit down with the creative types and say, what's this going to do? Is this a film that's a big award candidate? Because we don't want to screw that up by not, because it still is the world of qualifying for Academy Awards, and you need a theatrical release of 27 days or whatever it might be. So I think that's got to be part of the calculus. I think it's a case by case decision with relationships, with content, with prospects, and then also, marketing dollars spent to get more money, hopefully down the road, versus cut what we got, cut a check, put it streaming, and let's go.
Yeah, Pat, anything to add on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's going to be done, and there are going to be some films that flop because in either format. There are going to be some films that we anticipated or that others were anticipating being a big thing, and they go out on streaming, and they, like so many streaming products, dissipate into the aether, where we never hear about them again. And then there will be others that pull a Tenet and go out in theaters and are just gone. Like Tenet had made no dent. Beyond its sort of release, it made no dent in the popular imagination, which is saying something for a Christopher Nolan film. So yeah, I think it's uncharted territory. I do worry about like what's going to happen. I mean, 2019, we've talked about this a lot. That 2019 was a phenomenal year for cinema because a lot of the small, the Portraits of a Lady on Fire, the Parasites, the even Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was sort of a not a blockbuster. And we got to enjoy so many of those while still seeing, keeping up with the Marvel movie. I forget what Marvel movies came out last year, but, keeping up with them. And I feel like I'm going to be torn and going to spend so much time in a cinema. And, are we going to miss some of the smaller films because they all got to move out of the way of, 10, Avengers movies and DC blockbusters and all that stuff.
Right. Yeah, with the backlog, that's a really great point. I think right now the immediate effect seems to be is we're not getting a lot of the sort of the cream that's rising to the top, and we're not getting a lot of the the big blockbuster stuff. We're getting a lot of sort of the middling stuff that they seem to be all right with releasing right now, because they know wherever they put it out, they probably just want to recoup some of their losses for the year, and they figure they can cover it with some of these sort of mid-tier movies that, to JB's point, are probably not going to be awards contenders. And it seems like anything awardsy, they kind of are looking at next year now, positioning them in sort of prime awards territory. Yep. I do wonder if for independent features, and it's been increasingly going this way, but maybe it pushes it even further to the apparatus is going direct to consumer on a lot of these and doing limited runs in sort of art houses and things like that. Because I mean, it seems to make sense. I've even seen on anybody who subscribed to the Criterion channel, they've debuted probably 6 or 8 movies on there that were probably waiting for some type of distribution in the US. Some of them even in 2019, 2020, that probably would have at least gotten an art house run, but they went direct to Criterion, which I thought was kind of interesting, because usually the value there is their back library of stuff, not necessarily new releases. So I thought that was very interesting. All right, so wrapping up the show here, we want to do a little bit of an I told you so. Because back when news broke about Quibi and its launch to become this sort of new streaming powerhouse, using these really short snippets of entertainment to be consumed, we actually, I think, we're on a podcast on record talking about just questioning basically the business strategy there, and what would be appealing about it. Well, it turns out we were right. Quibi is Kaputski, shuttering after about 6 months, I think, after launch, which is pretty bad. I mean, they launched about as badly timed as possible, and they've raised about $2 billion to get this thing started. We have a story linked in the description if you want to read about the Quibi, and there's a very long piece on Vulture. I think New York Magazine did like 10,000 word piece about sort of the internal strife at Quibi as this launch has failed. So I'll go to you first, Pat. For anybody unfamiliar with this app, this total disaster, what went wrong?
I think this. I think he had a bunch of people who had a real faith in their ideas, but had no idea who they were making it for. Because these Gen Z, like, they have TikTok, they have YouTube. You know, you can't even take TikTok. They've really tried to take TikTok away from the Zoomers, and they have not been successful. It has not slowed their roll at all, and so it certainly wasn't for them, and it certainly wasn't for millennial age people like us. I mean, I cannot recall a single conversation that I've had with another person in my age group about this product or expressing anything other than disdain. So I think that they just thought that they invented an audience for themselves, convinced themselves it was going to work, and then had enough pull to $2 billion down a drain, I guess. JB?
Yeah, you had some thoughts.
Yeah, well, the problem sometimes, and it's a good problem to have, believe me, you're rich and you're very successful, which is Jeffrey Katzenberg. You basically helped reinvent with Michael Eisner, Disney, the modern day Disney that Bob Iger has taken to another level. You reinvented animation there. You discovered Pixar. You got a lot of good stuff in your resume if you're Katz. DreamWorks, right? You're pals with Geffen and Spielberg. I mean, that's pretty hefty company, right? Barack Obama's a pal of yours. I mean, you ride a good roll. So you come up with this idea, Quibu, whatever it is, and you think, I'm going to be a hipster again. I'm going to be on the front lines again. I'm going to be cutting edge, baby. And sometimes you get yourself convinced that even though this is maybe not a great idea, it is a great idea because it's your idea. Meg Whitman is no slouch. She's run some great companies, really, really sharp person. And then you can look at all the people that put money into this and some creatives that got behind it, directors and producers that said, yeah, we're in. And you can convince yourself that this is really good, because if it wasn't, why would all these people be involved? And it's a terrible idea because, like you said, Pat, it already exists. I think YouTube is this, right?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you take some of that initiative and go, why don't we build a mega channel or two on YouTube? Because look at all this talent we can bring to the table, because that's where all the people you're talking about, they already go to YouTube. I don't need to invent something for them to watch this stuff. It's all short form entertainment for the most part.
And it all exists already.
Why wouldn't you just put the money behind the creative effort to organize it and build a large commercial enterprise? It seems to me that could have been what to do. Now, since we're live, I got some advice from Ms. Whitman and Mr. Katzenberg. Call up AMC and say, look, I got $2 billion. What will that get me? And I get a majority interest in AMC company with $2 billion. Because I know eventually people will come back into movie theaters, and I know that model makes money. It does make money. Even
as an audience.
Even with crappy popcorn, it makes money. That would be my advice. Don't give the money back yet. Make a phone call. See what happens.
Well, you brought in legacy distribution, but I think it's also legacy thinking there, because what basically they're trying to do, you talk about YouTube and TikTok, it's the form is different in terms of what the type of entertainment is, who's making it, even the structure of the stories and what they're delivering. It's not the same as these really polished, really well-produced things. It's like clearly there's an audience for sort of DIY, sort of fun, disposable type entertainment. And that's not what this was trying to be. It was trying to be very short serialized stuff. And it didn't, for that generation that, like Pat alluded to, the Zoomers that they're trying to hit, they have their own language. They have their own way that they tell stories, and it's different. And it eventually will make its way onto the big screen, and we'll see how that plays out. I'm sure there'll be a lot of great directors, since everybody's so camera centric in that generation. A lot of great visual artists too, but it's just, you're right. It's two generations removed, basically not understanding how the others communicate, which I think sums up a lot of issues.
I mean, when you think about it, in our modern lifetime, there's only one Dick Clark. Okay. Dick Clark went from the Bobby Soxers right after Sinatra through the Dion and the Belmonts in the 50s into the 60s with, the pre-Beatles and then after the Beatles and 70. He went through 4 decades and he was still managed to be, they used to call him the world's oldest teenager. And he seemed to still be able to stay relevant because he kept his finger on the pulse of what was going on. But he didn't pretend that he was cutting edge. He just sort of kept up with things. And somehow he seemed like he was okay with what was going on. It's a much different world today. Right? I mean, there's so many segmentations and so many different generations that are watching different stuff that it's hard to keep your finger on exactly what the next thing's going to be. I mean, it's just very hard. And when you raise that kind of money, it's almost like you better be right, because if you're wrong, it's going to be a big time thing.
Yeah. I mean, you see it. I mean, most directors who have longevity end up have other people start writing their stuff as they get, like, you see that, like, that's how they manage to stay younger and relevant, unless you're somebody like, I don't know, like we have a series upcoming called Essential to Me. We talked about Terrence Malick. He writes and directs all of his stuff, but he has a very distinctive aesthetic that he has an audience that's been built around that. But if you're trying to stay relevant as a storyteller, you got to sort of roll with the times. You got to, expose yourself to sort of younger things and younger ideas. And I think that was, to me, a big failure of this endeavor. Well, gents, right about 25 minutes. We did it. We made it through our first live stream. Hopefully the first of very, very many. So this was Talk of the Town. Again, your condensed entertainment news for the week. We will be back tomorrow. We're going to experiment with a little bit of a weekend preview and more great stuff to come in November. We have 2 long form shows / podcasts that will be available on the Curated Media channel here for you guys to consume. We have Adam and the Beak on gangster movies, as well as the 3 of us getting together, putting our great minds together in our series Essential to Me, where we're going to talk about some of our favorite films of the 2010s. So be on the lookout for that as November comes around. Plenty of good content to come, and we will
someday again see you in the movies.
Take care, folks.